Monique, so really glad that you can join us today.
Thanks.
So you, there's the little music.
That's my music, yes.
Okay, so you have an incredibly interesting personal story, and I'd love to share a little bit of this today. I mean, if I understand correctly, so you were born near Atlanta.
No, I was born in Perth Amboy, New Jersey.
Oh,
I grew up in Jersey, yes.
I knew you were raised in New Jersey for some reason. Okay, fact checkers. You were born and raised in New Jersey to a single mom.
Yes.
You had your first child shortly after high school.
Yes.
Attended college at Ohio State. Second child shortly after that. Landed this incredible job at USA Today. And that's actually the start of the story.
Second child was way later.
Okay, again, fact checker situation. No, I'm sorry. But suffice to say, like, quite a journey. Yeah. And Zach mentioned to me that your mom kind of recently said to you, or not, maybe, I don't know if it's you told him recently, your mom probably told you this a long time ago, that the world is not fair, but you do make your own circumstances. So
yes.
I was wondering if you could talk about what that quote means to you, and how these kind of challenges and your journey fueled your business and life drive.
Wow, those are great questions. Yes.
Right.
To the first, can you all hear me? Okay. To the first question, my mother raised us, allowing us to understand that we weren't our circumstances, and that everything was temporary, and that we needed to understand how to navigate through adversity. So which leads me to the second answer. I don't know that it wasn't until the world told me I was different, or I experienced the differences of bias, I would say, whether it was based on our zip code or based on me coming from a multicultural family. It was others. It never came from me. And so I don't know that I really received any of that. My mother also taught us we had the choice to receive the information people were putting in front of us. And if it was negative, I actually didn't entertain it at all. It's kind of how I lived my life. It's still do to this day, actually.
And we'll get to, I'm sure that's really fed many of the experiences and challenges you've had in your career. So during your seven years at USA, I know I don't trust any facts here. So 7 years at USA Today?
Yes, I was there for almost 8 years, yes.
So then you leave and you start your own marketing company.
So no.
Is this Monique?
It's definitely Monique. Listen, I mean, I gave her the questions in advance. I mean, maybe they got lost somewhere.
They probably did. Actually, they probably did. As Ryan just talked about, fundraising is not fun. It's not my favorite part of Rain Ventures, so that's what we've been doing for the last year and a half. But I'll say this. Yeah. At USA Today, I was the youngest and first African-American senior executive. I was only 22, going on 23 when I got there, and I was on the executive side for marketing and advertising. A year into it, I realized that corporate America, #1 companies, they actually didn't know anything different than the startup world. Because at Ohio State, I actually was a part of a startup. There was 2 of us who did a startup for someone. And I realized that in order to kind of stay engaged, shall I say, I decided to start my own company, solving a problem that working there I realized was a big problem. So I did start a branding agency while I was there. They allowed me to, as long as it never had a conflict with USA Today. So I was doing both, actually.
And then, so I guess, 3 truths and a lie here. So you repped people like Kanye West, Timbaland, Bureau of Communications. One of those 3 potentially is true?
So yes, those are all true. Okay. So Burrell was one of my clients. Yep. Verizon was one of my clients. Turner was a client of mine. Timbaland was my client because he ended up being my husband. And yes, Kanye, I did one of Kanye's first 7-figure checks many, many years ago. But yes, I created this bridge between brand identity and for our corporate and talent. Talent never understood their brand, and they didn't even understand R&D. So when Tim and I met, he asked me to shut that agency down, leave USA Today, and then we built our own label and publishing company together.
And so you served as CEO of both, correct?
Yes.
And And then I think you had artists like Chris Cornell. I have to mention Chris Cornell because of where we are.
One of the best.
One Republic, Nelly Furtado. I mean, some amazing talent. So I'm always fascinated by how we bring creative talent doesn't like business. Sometimes it's like, oh, that's the business people. There's like a sort of it seems like there's like a negative tinge, except they are business. Of course, like it's a business,
yes,
right?
It just depends on how we all look at creativity.
Right.
I don't really live in the restriction box.
Yep.
If anyone kind of looks at my, what I've done in life, I actually don't allow myself to be tagged by restrictions. So all of those things, they kind of just always rolled off me. I actually think we're all creators. Mm-hmm. I think we all have the power to create. We're the ones limiting ourselves. Society is limiting us. But the beautiful thing about being a business person is you are creating. Mm-hmm. I create every single day. I just don't perform. I'm not a performer. I think that it depends on how people define the word. I don't really live with those limitations.
And so when you start working with one of these incredibly talented artists, what are some of the first things you establish with them for the relationship to make sure that you fuel their creativity as opposed to constrain it? You help them capitalize and build their brand. What are there any guiding principles in the beginning to make that work?
I think a mutual respect. No judgment. Yep. I think it's really important in the creative process that there's no critique or judgment, that you just allow things to happen. All of our artists became multi-platinum artists, mm-hmm. not just domestically, but internationally. And I do believe that as a leader, it was my job to kind of listen to what they wanted, but then also implement the strategy side of it and the bigger vision side. And it was a partnership. Mm-hmm. I think that we always had a mutual respect. We agree to disagree when that was necessary, because that happened a lot. And most importantly, be professional mm-hmm. on both ends. And so that was always kind of the tone, and have fun. Right. Creating is supposed to be a fun experience. And from a music perspective, you're giving it away, and then you need something in return. That's why they love to perform. And so I understood that concept, especially being married to a creative.
For sure.
Right.
So continuing the journey here. So in 2012, is that when you stepped away from the music industry?
No.
Of course. I'm going to pose every question now as when. When did you step away from the music industry?
So I technically have never.
Okay.
Tim and I are still business partners. I stepped down as the acting CEO of all of our companies about 2.5 years ago to fully focus full-time on Rain Ventures.
Yeah. Now, so tell us a bit about Rain Ventures, what the mission is, and it's kind of the progress to date, of realizing it.
So Rain Ventures actually, in the music industry, about 15 years. There was no iPhone. I'll say that. Because I came from R&D background in corporate America and USA Today, most people looked at it as like a newspaper. I was actually selling the executive on the go mm-hmm. and creating campaigns for that executive. So I understood that music, we would receive it differently. Back then, there was BlackBerries that we all used in the industry. And so I created the first ever partnership with Verizon and BlackBerry, and whoever had a BlackBerry on Verizon, I had this studio bus, and I would bring like Tim and Madonna, Tim and Justin and Madonna, Tim and Rihanna. I mean, I brought everyone in there, and we would take that feed, because that's what we called it back then. It wasn't called content, and whoever had that phone, they would get it live. The data came back so unbelievable. I was so excited. I would go to all the big wigs, and I'm at the board meeting. I'm like, listen, people are gonna watch videos on their phones. And they're like, no, they're not, Monique. I'm like, well, they actually are. And so I actually was so hurt. And I didn't know if I wasn't being listened to because I was a woman or because of who I was married to, because that was both possibilities. And so a few years after that, I decided to go get my executive MBA at a program at George Washington, UCLA, in Columbia. And that's when I was introduced to like angel investing. And I was like, wow, we have this whole team of people, and no one is making sure we're financially literate. I'm a first generation college student. My ex-husband, he never went to college. And so we just trusted. We loved doing what we do. So we trusted everyone that we, hired, brought on to, help us become educated, so to speak. But I'm curious, and I don't wait for people to share things with me, so I wanted to learn. And while I was there, I became super actively involved in the angel investing side of things and realized that all the founders they were bringing to me that I was investing in, they all looked the same. There were no females, there were no black and brown people. And so I said to my now business partner, Erica, let's go do this. Let's write our own thesis. We'll use my money. And that's what we did for the first 7.5 years.
And then what kind of entrepreneurs, were you focusing on, with Erica?
I would say, this is what I would say, exceptional founders doing exceptional things, but we invest the way investing should have always been done, the way everything should always be done, and that's inclusively. Our portfolio for the last 10 years has always had the most wide variety of representation of all. And that's the way I like to understand the world to be, and that's what Rain Ventures does. We have a lens on women and people of color because in 2021, it's still less than 3% of funding from VCs that go out. It starts at places like this. Next year, Zach, we have to have some women in the Final Four. And so I do believe that you all set the tone. When it comes to the trends, when it comes to what is respected, it starts at institutions such as Cornell. And so those are the things that I'm fighting for every single day is all things equity and equality.
So what is the advice to firms that, it's always been a boutique business, venture capital, it seems, from the outside. And therefore, it's like tight networks of people who they went to college with and who their friends know. And, and as a result, you end up getting a same crop of people that look the same from the same schools with the same networks. How do we break that up? I mean, I think obviously part of it is more investors like you who are bringing different networks and everything else. But is there something also more systemic that we can do?
Yes. I think it starts with each of us individually and us taking a realistic and an honest look in the mirror and ask ourselves, what are we doing to consciously be aware of inclusion? What are we educating ourselves on? And also, why are we so afraid to be around things that don't walk like us, talk like us, or have the same experiences as us? I think that's actually very interesting, that we are purposely aligning ourselves with only like-minded people. I actually like to sit in a student seat at all times and put myself around all types of people. I feel like that's when we get all the answers to the things that we need. Clearly, things are not working based on the systems that were put into place. Do we keep complaining about them, or do we just become the change? I personally chose to become the change. And I don't put myself in environments that do not celebrate inclusion. Diversity is not an issue. We live in one of the most diverse nations. It's inclusion that is the issue. So I would say to everyone is that you have to question yourself. You have to check your own integrity. You have to check your own biases. We all have biases. You have to be honest with yourself and start going into different areas. Start networking with people you don't know. I think that's what makes this world better.
I think one thing that isn't done enough is a retrospective for teams on projects that really worked and what the makeup of the team was that made the project work. I mean, sometimes I feel like you said you look for extraordinary founders. I've started to think that you want an extraordinarily different group of extraordinary people, because the more, the co-founder that I found for my company came from Barcelona, didn't speak much English. And it just was very interesting from the onset that because we were completely different from backgrounds and language and nationality and religion and everything else, he just clearly, and I clearly saw different edges of something. And it was just a forcing function, right? And as I look back to teams that I'm most proud of, they had extraordinarily different, extraordinary people in them. And yet we sometimes just put teams together by default based on who your college roommate is or whatever else. And so maybe it's also some, convincing people, helping people understand you're actually stacking the deck in your favor by optimizing for difference.
That's actually something Eric and I have specialized in, is that we have founders who are Caucasian males. And we do invest in them, and we lead their round, and we help them understand that from the bottom up, internally and then externally, that you have to have inclusion. And so we will suggest the talent pool. And by the way, that's just as important, having those tough conversations, because I do believe that most people are just behaving out of habit and pattern, that most of us do not wake up with the intention of doing something wrong. The problem is that we don't communicate enough, and we're not having honest conversations. If I'm not allowed to speak honestly, I can't be there.
Yep.
And I think that we have to hold the honesty card a lot more valuable. To be politically correct, I don't see that changing anything. I think to be respectfully honest is what will change things. And I think that's where healing starts. And I think that acknowledging that just because someone else's experience is not your experience does not make theirs less valid. And I think that, Eric and I, we are very passionate, and we are executing on what inclusion looks like. And it is hard. It's hard fundraising. For 10 years, we've been doing this. For 10 years, we have a data room, yet we're considered inexperienced, investors. And what I recently said in a meeting is that if you all were doing it properly, I actually wouldn't be here. I had a very, very comfortable life. I could do my work in my sleep if I needed to do it at all. I don't choose to be comfortable. I'm very saddened that everyone else does, though, and that everyone just thinks, follow a system, and not using critical thinking, which is actually what is the best thing. And that does not require educations, that just requires taking a step back for a moment and asking yourself, why am I doing this?
What about, so when you do, how many investments have there been so far in the portfolio?
So in this fund, we do 10 to 12 a year. We started investing from this fund in April. We ended up doing 12 this year, and then we'll start again in January and do another 10 to 12.
Got it.
So each fund is 20 to 25 companies.
Got it. And so what's the experience like working with these founders, and what are the things that you and Erica feel your superpowers are to help them?
So what's really unique about Erica and I as Rain Ventures is that we are completely opposite. I am the visionary, I see no boundaries. I'm gonna fly today, and I really believe that. That is what I'm able to gift to the founders, is the ability to never give up, the ability to see not failure but lesson, the ability to have an honest ear. Erica she comes from Wall Street, she comes from an investment background, almost 30 years of it. So we are like, she loves the spreadsheets, I can't stand them. So she and I are like a perfect, beautiful marriage.
And there's a big debate, I think, amongst partners in venture capital firms of, do we try to both reach consensus on an investment, or do we optimize for moments where there's actually no consensus, but there's such great conviction? Have you had some of those investments where you're like, got to do this, and Erica's like, no way it's going to work?
So we, very early on, we actually incorporated a third party in case of. We have not, 10 years later, had to exercise that at all. And what it is that we trust and respect each other. And we're going to win together, and we're going to make mistakes together. It's really not that big of a deal. The reality is that we're going to do whatever it takes for the founders, for our LPs, and just for the ecosystem, period. And so that's the way we kind of look at it. But we haven't had that argument.
And it sounds like, therefore, you can respect each other's conviction so much so that you probably don't disagree, even if one of you has more conviction than the other.
Right, and it doesn't mean that we haven't disagreed. What it does mean is that we trust each other, and that if one of us has been super, like, I know you don't understand it, but I really believe in this, then that's what it is. And we're going to agree up to it as if we both understood it the same.
So when you're looking at founders, I mean, you have a history of having and managing relationships with creative people. Being married to one is all right.
I actually compare that all the time when I say this, is that, almost 30 years of being in the music industry and developing raw talent is literally it's equivalent to developing raw founders. And build that, support system for them.
Yep.
And whatever it is, they're not falling outside of it. You're just providing it. You're getting it. And even when you can't do it, you find the person that does.
Yep. Can you share a couple of the companies you're most excited about in the portfolio?
All of them.
I know it's hard to pick your babies, but
But I will tell you that Solo Funds, which is raising their Series B right now, which is a fintech company, it really blossomed. I was their first check-in, their second check-in.
What's it called? Sorry,
Solo,
Solo
SOLO,
Funds.
yes.
Got it.
So Solo Funds started, Rodney Williams, I invested in his very first company, Listener. And when he first created Listener, he said, Monique, I have this idea for this second company, but we'll get to it later. And I said, perfect. When we get to it, I'll give you some money. And so he came to me. There was no paperwork. I don't even think they had named it yet. And I gave him the first check. Then he came back, gave him the second check. Why I was so excited about it is growing up in income-based housing and watching my mother work 3 jobs, go to school, do all these things by herself. It might be Wednesday and she didn't get paid till Friday. So there may have been a time or two where the lights were off with candles, okay, until payday. And that's just how it was sometimes. And what we knew is that a lot of people in the community were going to these payday lending places, and they might borrow like $500, and a year later they're still paying interest for that $500, and all of a sudden a $500 loan became like a $2,500 payment. They're already struggling, and now they're way, way behind. And so when Rodney and Travis created Solo Funds to kind of disrupt the peer-to-peer lending, create a peer-to-peer lending marketplace, genius. I'm really excited about an announcement that they're making next month. Their revenue is unbelievable, but yet and still they're having a difficult time, raising a Series B. They're 2 Black male founders. They didn't come from Ivy League. In fact, I think one of their meetings we were at, the investor said, if the Stanford guys couldn't do it, there's no way you can. And so, these are real stories and these are true things. And so until things are a little more balanced, I think that we all have a responsibility to make sure that equity and equality is being worked on.
Yeah.
Solo Funds is great. ShareBite, that's a New York company. I love ShareBite. Amazing founder. Monica and Andy, amazing. Dormify. One of the ones that we recently led is a company called Claire Brief, legal tech. Unbelievable. She just won a huge award. She could have had anyone invest in her company, and she chose Eric and I to lead her round, even though Microsoft tried to. So it's just a testament to how we feel about founders, and then also the authentic way we approach just these issues. We don't know everything, but don't worry, you're being added to my Rolodex, because I'll call you when it deals with that type of stuff.
I want to meet Solo Funds. So,
oh my gosh, I would love to introduce you to Travis and Rodney.
That's cool. And I'm scared to ask the next question, because you could tell me, what are you talking about, Scott? But I'll ask anyways. So are you currently on TV on a show?
So,
Cool.
yes,
Okay,
yes. So before COVID, I was asked by a production company to film a show on Discovery Channel called Undercover Billionaire. And I said no. I've never wanted to be in the limelight. I don't really care about red carpet. I don't care about any of that stuff. But then when COVID happened, the phone calls that I was receiving, I actually, and I say this with all humility and with not offending anyone, when COVID happened, despite all of the negative things that came with it, I always try to find the positive in something. And it was a really great time for me to reconnect, reset, restore, refocus. And I didn't have a bored moment. Like, I was so into it. Like, just the time I was able to get with my children at home. I hadn't seen my house consistently for 2 months, And so, but all the phone calls I was getting, people were overwhelmed and people were traumatized. And most importantly, they were fearful of the unknown. And I don't really operate out of fear. So I didn't relate to that. But what I did relate to was the human spirit not being in the best place. And so when they called me again, I said, you know what, because I feel like this is an appropriate time to inspire people, I will go do it.
Yeah.
And was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
first of all, like the fact that you're busy and you had to travel, and so like being here is great. And sometimes, I lead a big organization at Adobe, and we've obviously been trying to have more discussion around inclusion and changing our practices and stuff like that. And so you always go to the people in the organization that are already involved in these efforts that often are underrepresented minorities. And then I ended up, sometimes I realize like I'm putting an extra burden also on people to have to, spend more of their time. They're also trying to progress in their careers and, kill their project and ship their product and whatever else. And here I'm the executive coming and saying, can you take some time to speak to this group, to that group, and whatever? So how do you make sure that you're on this purpose, you're on this mission? I mean, the good news is also that your firm is really geared towards these values. And so the more you speak, the more entrepreneurs are going to meet, the more investors are going to meet, et cetera. But how do we just continue this conversation without also like putting so much burden on people that can really, share it firsthand?
I think I think these conversations are important. I think that there needs to be more execution. Mm-hmm. I think that to have the conversation with no intentional strategy once the information is received, I think is where we keep going wrong. Yep. And I think that people are spending more money on these like things that are bringing everyone together in a room, but that same money could be deployed. And so, I would say that it's all a case by case, but I think it starts with us just really, really not just wanting to keep talking about the problems, but actually just solve it. Like, let's just do it. I think Nike, I like the Nike slogan for many reasons, and I just do it, and that's where I like to sit. Just do it.
And that action-oriented, approach has certainly served you throughout your career. Last question, and then we'll open up to questions. But what are you most? One of the big buzzwords is the creator economy these days, and how content creators, are becoming businesses, and businesses have to create more content. And so this is sort of in your zone of expertise from so many years. What's your take on that, and anything else you're really excited about in the venture world these days?
I'm excited first of all, I just wake up grateful every day. That's what I'm excited about, is that when I wake up, I just have another day to absorb information, share information, and, really be the change that I'm excited about. What am I excited about? I'm excited about this shift that's happening with humanity. I have to tell you, the things that excite me are usually not business. I just love business. And so, but, the things that are exciting me is things like this. Like, I'm a girl from Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and I'm at Cornell with an engaged audience. I think if we take time to just appreciate the smaller things, I think the bigger things just naturally happen. And so for me, I'm excited about humanity right now and the consciousness that is starting to wake up. I was watching a documentary. I only watch documentaries. And so I was watching a documentary on the way here. It's called Rumble. And it's all about indigenous music and how it impacted rock and roll. And to see that documentary and where it's telling so much truth that's been hidden for such a long time, I actually got very emotional. I cried, because that's the stuff we should be striving for every day, is truth, compassion, consciousness, connection. The business stuff just comes. It's so easy. The business stuff is actually the easier side.
That's true, and I think that we get caught up in buzzwords when in fact ultimately the drivers of
all the stuff that's being created and curated, it's not all good stuff. So I literally do not even look at all that stuff on social media, because idle time is dangerous, and confused time is even more dangerous. And so and then when we are what we consume, whether it's food, information, whatever. So I personally just don't even really engage in that stuff. But I'm excited about people wanting to be better.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to end. Do we have time for a question or two, Zach, or are we out?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I want to be respectful of your, I got to get to the airport. I don't want to get, okay.
I still have a good 10, 15
Cool,
minutes.
all right. So we have a question in the front.
We have one right here.
Over here. Hi.
Okay, there first, then here. Okay.
Hi, Monique. Thank you so
I'm sorry,
much.
the chair does not roll. So I didn't mean to have my back to anyone.
Totally fine, totally fine. First of all, thank you so much for coming in to speak. I just think your mindset is incredibly inspiring, and we were just
thank
saying,
you.
like, we're so grateful to have heard your thoughts
Oh,
and everything
thank
right
you.
now. As a new founder, definitely experiencing high highs, low lows, and I'm curious, like, you were talking about, like, don't bother with the barriers, you don't live within barriers, but, like, how do you get past them when they try to come up in front of you?
I think it goes back to my mindset, and I think that it depends on how you look at obstacles. For me personally, it's just I'm just like, oh, okay, I got to figure that out. Like, it's like a puzzle for me, and it's just always just trying to solve. And sometimes I solve, and sometimes I don't. But it doesn't really impact me or shift my emotions. It's like, okay, this is what worked, this is what didn't. I literally try to make it that simple for me, almost childlike. When we're children, our curiosity does not stop just because we hurt our hand or we fell. In fact, it gets a little more aggressive. And so I think that the innocence of that mind, I think is what I try to stay connected to all the time.
That's wonderful. Thank you so
No,
much.
thank you.
Right here, yeah.
Hello, Monique. Thank you so much for being here. I don't know if this is going to be embarrassing, but never heard about you.
It's okay. No, that's okay.
Not anything against you. It's just something that I never came across. I'm here today. I'm an entrepreneur. I founded a company years ago, and some of the things you were sharing really touched my heart because it's hard to explain when someone has not been through it. When you've walked those shoes and you've been there and had to pretend not to be the owner of your company so someone could talk to you, it hurts deeply. How do you heal from that? Because I hear the shift, you said something about the shift in humanity. And I find myself getting to that place of being positive, just moving ahead in spite of the fear. How do you continue to do that and not carry the weight of that, I want to say, mental conditioning? And I see the next generation. I was just talking to these young ladies here that when I was their age, I couldn't imagine sharing a house. Now we have Airbnb. I couldn't imagine sharing a car. Now we have Uber. I couldn't imagine sharing clothes. Now that's a big business. How do we disengage from our past and say, okay, you know what? That happened, but that does not need to define me. And as a business person, an entrepreneur, keep reaching and keep having what you said, that innocence, that curiosity, that mindset of saying, I'm conscious, I'm aware, I want to keep engaging, I want to give expression to my spirit. How do you do that?
Lots of work, right? In order to be at this place, it means I went through a lot of things. And so I would say to you that no one has your answer, you do. We all have our own answers if we allow ourselves to take a step back and sit with ourselves for a second. So I encourage you to prioritize self-time as well. And when I wake up in the morning, I get up super early. I'm up by 4 o'clock. By 4:30, I'm meditating, I'm praying, I'm journaling, I'm setting all my intentions for that day. I really don't have time to sit in the negative. There's lots of negative things out there. You choose what you want to do every day. So I would say to you, just focus on being the healthiest version of yourself. And I'm in counseling. I have a standing weekly call every week. And 99% of the time, there's actually nothing wrong. But it's about maintenance. I think that we haven't discussed the preventative enough. And I think that we're in a place now in society and in life where the preventative is becoming more important than, the medical side and, serving us with medicines and these things. And so I would just say you have to prioritize. And that may mean you have to wake up an hour earlier. As a mother of 3, I always wanted to be up a couple hours before my children because I didn't want to overwhelm them and I didn't want them overwhelming me selfishly either.
One more, perhaps? Anybody? If not, we will let Monique get home to Miami. Monique, that was awesome. Thank you so much.